All right, how's everyone doing? I am Rich Celenza. Thanks for checking out my channel. So I was listening to somebody else, that Valuetainment, I think it's called. I forgot the guy's name. I love some of his stuff. And he does a top 20 thing I just heard recently regarding helping men. And, when I get different ideas off people on, YouTube, say, for instance, or different people's podcasts or whatever the case may be, I like to, give them a shout out. It's not that I'm ripping anybody off, but they hit certain subjects or things they talk about that hit me. And I'm like, wow, I should do, a podcast on that as well. And he said something that was very interesting to me during that. And he talked about young men, I think, always overreacting when in a relationship. And I was like, wow, I don't really talk about that too much. I talk about kind of taking things too seriously, or maybe texting too much, or talking too much. I shouldn't say that. I do touch upon this subject matter, but maybe the way he kind of touched upon it was a little different. And he kind of touched upon it where, a lot of men that weren't in relationships, I think is what I should say, that a lot of men that weren't in relationships, they start to get in a relationship and they become very jealous and insecure. Now, I talk a lot about that. But I also think a lot of people may take things too seriously, too quickly. I talk about that as well a lot of times. But also, once in that relationship, kind of overreacting regarding everything. And it kind of builds. Like, you started off dating and you loved enjoying each other's company. And before you know it, as I call it, it becomes an interrogation. You start, complaining, or you start kind of overanalyzing everything. And this goes for men and women. I shouldn't just say men, because I do think we have a specific amount, I shouldn't say specific, we have all these different rules and regulations when it comes to what our beliefs are when in a relationship, or how they should be, and how others should act toward them. And I get it 100%. But a lot of times I think we overreact when people aren't doing things that we think they should be doing, or acting a certain way that they should be acting, or growing at the same level that the other person is growing, or maybe being as loving as the other person, or, and not being patient a lot of times. When it comes to being in relationships, I talk about it a lot of times that, men and women are two totally different things. I don't care how you look at it or how you want to play it. We have two totally different identities, and we have different ways of doing things, and it takes a lot of patience to deal with one another. I don't care what side you're on. And then a lot of times too, let's face it, we have friends and family members and all these other people kind of involved in our relationships, right? And part of the overreaction too, I think a lot of times, is it's not just who you're with, it's how the others that they're with, or friends or family, how they're, reacting in this relationship. And maybe you're overreacting regarding that. And it's not easy, because let's face it, when you're with someone, you're with the family, or you're with their friends, because they're a big part of your life no matter what. So I just kind of want to do a podcast on this, because I want people to understand, when you're in this relationship, or if you start a relationship, a lot of times I talk about just having fun. And it's hard sometimes when you start getting more into a relationship, especially as the months go by, because a lot of times one or the other may want to start taking things to a much higher level, moving in with one another, right? And the other one may not want to. Instead of overreacting and saying, oh my God, you don't want to live with me? Well, how would you ever marry me? Or what kind of person are you that you don't trust living with me, or whatever? The person just may not be ready for that. It could be marriage too after a certain amount of time. One may want to get married and one doesn't. Again, you can overreact and blow the whole relationship, or you can say, really, maybe he's just not, or her, not ready to get married. Maybe they just want to take their time and figure some things out. Maybe it's finances. Maybe they just aren't ready to necessarily settle down for the rest of their life, because they take it very serious. Like when you get married, it's supposed to be for life. That's very, I think a lot of times when we have people not always wanting to do what we want to do, you really got to look at that and go, wow, they're taking that maybe a lot more serious than I am. Or they're really thinking things through. They're not wanting to hurt me a lot of times. They just want to take a different approach maybe, or want to take their time. And again, the overreaction, and it could be as simple, a lot of relationships I see that end or end up bad, it's usually nowadays, I think, and I'm not just saying this, it's like texting. It's like communicating through our phones. It could be even through Messenger, or, what other people are doing online, social media. It could be even an email, or even on the phone, even talking. a lot of things just get blown so out of proportion, and it starts with what I call a wick, and it turns into an inferno. Like, a lot of times, I'll just tell you, my relationships, what I learned is I quit doing negative texting. I quit arguing. I talk a lot about this in my program and in my book, Wingman, where arguing through text or even on the phone a lot of times is so bullshitty to me. And it ruined a lot of relationships with me and friendships, I think, which I had a nip in the bud. I said, you know what? If I have a problem with somebody, I have to talk to them face to face. And I don't allow people to send me negative text or kind of bait me into getting into arguments, because I realized, again, it just would escalate. It could be as simple as, what are you doing right now? And I could be like, I'm doing this. Or like, why are you doing that? Didn't you say you were supposed to do this? Or weren't we supposed to do that? Or why aren't you home yet? Or why aren't you doing this? Like, being questioned, and then I'm getting aggravated. Before you know it, I'm on an all-out, text war here. And before you know it, now I get on the phone and I'm already aggravated. Or I go see the person. But I'm like, I'm giving like too much power to a lot of these things when it comes to my relationship. I'm overreacting. And you may be one of these people too who overreacts a lot. And if you're somebody who's single or has a problem, staying in a relationship, you got to take the hit. Maybe you're the one who overreacts a lot when it comes to being in relationships. And it's not easy. I'm telling you right now, especially if you've been through multiple relationships, or you've been divorced, or you lived with people, or you've been ghosted and dumped. You have a fear component. It's understandable. But I'm telling you, the cooler and calmer you are, I think, throughout your relationships. That doesn't mean you're a pushover. Doesn't mean you're a pussy, or that you need to be walked all over. But a lot of times you'd be shocked if you just take your time. And even when somebody else is overreacting, I call it the 24, 48 kind of like hour wait time. Because I've had people yell at me or scream at me, and I'm like, you know what? I think they're just having a bad day. Let me give them 24 hours. Let me just chill out here. And most of the time, the next day or 2 days, I hit them up. They either apologize, or they're like, man, I'm so sorry. I was having a horrible day. I shouldn't have said this, or I shouldn't have said that. A lot of times we just vent. And because the person we're with, we think we can just, verbally abuse them. And it doesn't even always have to even be their problem or the problem they have with you. It's just their life in general. But we do, I think, a lot of times overreact, and then we abuse the ones we're closest with, which a lot of times could be our boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, and these type of situations where maybe become self-aware. And before you send that negative text, or before you start that argument, or before you start overreacting at wherever you're at or whatever you're doing, sitting back and going, wait a minute, what is this going to lead to? Is this going to help my relationship, or is it going to destroy it? So anyways, if you got any questions or comments, please feel free to hit me up. I'm at richcelenza.com. My program is Mastering Self-Confidence. That's really to help men find the woman of their dreams, even if they've been through a bad breakup or divorce. I'm also helping a lot of women with relationships, which is kind of how I'm coming up with some different subject matters. If you listen to my podcast, it's actually women kind of addressing me and saying, Rich, why don't you, take on this, or, why don't you mention this or that? And I'm like, wow, I only kind of looked at it from a man's perspective. I love that women hit me up from their perspective, because it changes the dynamic, and very interesting stuff. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I wish everyone nothing but the best.